The morning sun cast long shadows across the quiet campus as Catherine walked slowly toward the main building, her heart beating faster with each step. 3 months had passed since she last walked these familiar paths, 3 months since the accident that changed everything. Her fingers unconsciously ran through her newly blonde hair, still getting used to the dramatic transformation that had happened during her recovery. William walked beside her, his presence both comforting and nerve-wracking. They had spent countless hours together over the summer, but returning to the place where their relationship had begun felt different somehow. More real. More permanent. The weight of what they had been through together hung in the air between them like an unspoken promise. Catherine remembered the last day of spring semester vividly. She had been rushing to meet William at the library when the call came. Her mother's voice, shaky and distant, telling her about her father's sudden heart attack. The world had seemed to stop moving as she stood there in the middle of the campus courtyard, students flowing around her like water around a stone. William had found her there 20 minutes later, still clutching her phone, tears streaming down her face. Without hesitation, he had cancelled his summer internship plans and driven her home that very evening. The 8-hour drive to her small hometown had been filled with worried silence and Catherine's quiet sobs. The summer that followed had been a blur of hospital visits, family meetings, and sleepless nights. Catherine's father had survived, but the recovery was long and difficult. The medical bills piled up, and her family's small business struggled without his leadership. Catherine had made the painful decision to take a semester off to help, despite being so close to graduation. It was during one of those long nights at the hospital that Catherine had made her most dramatic decision. She had been sitting in the uncomfortable plastic chair beside her father's bed, watching the steady rise and fall of his chest, when she caught her reflection in the dark window. Her brown hair looked lifeless, her face pale and drawn from weeks of stress and poor sleep. The next morning, she had walked into the first salon she could find and asked them to change everything. The hairdresser had been hesitant at first, warning her about making dramatic changes during emotional times. But Catherine had been insistent. She needed to feel different, to look different, to somehow mark this chapter of her life as separate from everything that came before. The transformation had been shocking. Gone were the mousy brown locks she had worn since childhood, replaced by a vibrant blonde that seemed to glow in the salon's bright lights. When she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. The woman staring back looked stronger somehow, more confident, as if the change in hair color had awakened something that had been sleeping inside her. William had been speechless when he saw her that evening. They had been staying in her childhood bedroom, sleeping in separate beds like teenagers, navigating the strange intimacy of shared crisis. When she walked through the door with her new hair, he had stopped mid-sentence in whatever he had been saying to her mother and just stared. "You look." He had started, then stopped, shaking his head with a small smile. "You look like you again. But different. Better." That had been exactly what she needed to hear. Throughout the summer, as her father slowly recovered and the family business stabilized, Catherine had felt herself changing in ways that went far beyond her appearance. The crisis had stripped away pretenses and revealed what truly mattered. Her relationship with William had deepened during those long, difficult weeks in ways she hadn't expected. They had talked about everything during those summer evenings on her parents' back porch. About their fears for the future, about their dreams beyond college, about what they wanted their life together to look like. Conversations they might have avoided during the busy chaos of campus life had become natural in the quiet space of her hometown. William had proven himself in ways that went beyond grand gestures. He had learned to make her father's favorite coffee just the way he liked it. He had helped her younger brother with his summer math homework without being asked. He had painted the exterior of her family's house when her father couldn't manage it himself. Small acts of service that spoke louder than any declaration of love. But, perhaps most importantly, he had been there for the hard conversations. When Catherine had cried about feeling guilty for leaving school, William had listened without trying to fix it. When she had raged about the unfairness of medical bills that threatened to bankrupt her family, he had held her without offering empty reassurances. When she had worried that she was holding him back from his own goals, he had simply taken her hand and told her that his goals had changed to include her happiness as a non-negotiable component. The decision to return to school together had come gradually. Catherine's father had finally been cleared to return to work part-time, and her younger brother had shown remarkable maturity in stepping up to help with the family business. More importantly, Catherine had realized that finishing her degree wasn't just about her own future anymore, it was about being able to help her family in more meaningful ways. Now, walking across the campus with William beside her, Catherine felt the weight of all those summer experiences. They were returning as different people than they had been when they left. More serious, perhaps, but also more certain about what mattered to them. Students were beginning to notice them as they walked. Catherine could see heads turning, hear whispered conversations starting in their wake. The blonde hair made her more noticeable, certainly, but there was something else too. Something in the way she carried herself, or perhaps in the obvious closeness between her and William. She remembered how uncertain their relationship had been at the end of spring semester. They had been dating for 6 months, but it still felt new, undefined. They hadn't talked about summer plans together or made any commitments beyond the immediate future. The crisis had changed all that, forcing them into an intimacy that might have taken years to develop under normal circumstances. "Are you ready for this?" William asked quietly as they approached the student center where many of their friends would likely be gathered. Catherine paused, considering the question seriously. Was she ready to face everyone's questions about her summer, about her changed appearance, about her relationship with William? Was she ready to pretend that everything was normal when so much had shifted in her world? "I don't know if anyone's ever really ready," she said finally. "But I think we can handle whatever comes." William smiled, the expression transforming his usually serious face. "We can handle it," he agreed, emphasizing the word "we" in a way that made Catherine's heart flutter. As they entered the building, Catherine caught sight of herself in the glass doors. The blonde hair still surprised her sometimes, but she was beginning to love the way it made her feel. Bold. Different. Like someone who had survived something difficult and come out stronger. The student center was buzzing with the energy of returning students. Groups clustered around tables, animated conversations filling the space with familiar chaos. Catherine felt a moment of disconnect, as if she was watching a movie of her old life rather than stepping back into it. Then, Maria spotted them from across the room. Catherine watched her friend's expression change from casual scanning to shocked recognition to something like awe. Maria nudged the people she was sitting with, and, suddenly, half their friend group was looking in their direction. "Catherine?" Maria's voice carried across the room, drawing even more attention. "Oh my God, Catherine!" The next few minutes were a blur of greetings, exclamations about her hair, and carefully vague explanations about her summer. Catherine found herself deflecting most questions with general statements about family time and personal growth. She wasn't ready to share the full story of her father's heart attack and the financial struggles that followed. Some experiences were still too raw, too personal to become casual conversation. But what struck her most was how natural it felt to have William beside her through all of it. He didn't hover or speak for her, but his presence was steady and supportive. When someone asked about their summer together, he would meet her eyes briefly, letting her take the lead while making it clear that they were very much a unit. "You look incredible," her friend Sarah said during a quieter moment. "The hair is amazing, but there's something else too. You seem, I don't know, more confident?" Catherine smiled, thinking about all the ways she had changed over the summer. "I guess I learned some things about myself," she said simply. Later, as they walked to their respective afternoon classes, William caught her hand gently. "That went well," he said. "Everyone seems happy to see you." "Happy to see us," Catherine corrected, squeezing his hand. "I noticed how people were looking at us. Like we're official now. Aren't we?" William asked, stopping to face her fully. Catherine looked at him, this man who had given up his summer plans without hesitation, who had learned to navigate her family's crisis with grace and patience, who had held her through the hardest moments of her life. "Yes," she said quietly. "I think we are." The rest of the afternoon passed in a series of small revelations. Professors who remembered her absence and welcomed her back warmly. Classmates who complimented her new look and asked about her summer in ways that showed genuine interest rather than mere politeness. Friends who seemed to sense that something fundamental had shifted in her relationship with William, even if they couldn't quite put their finger on what. By evening, Catherine felt exhausted but oddly exhilarated. The day had been overwhelming, certainly, but it had also felt like a successful re-entry into a world she had begun to fear she might not fit into anymore. As she and William walked back toward the dormitories in the gathering dusk, Catherine reflected on how much her perspective had changed. 3 months ago, college had felt like the entire world. Now it felt like one important piece of a much larger puzzle that included family responsibility, financial reality, and the kind of love that showed up in hospital waiting rooms and late-night conversations about uncertain futures. "Thank you," she said suddenly. William looked at her questioningly. "For what?" "For coming back with me. For staying with me over the summer. For everything." William stopped walking and turned to face her fully. In the soft light of the campus street lamps, his expression was serious but gentle. "Catherine, you don't need to thank me for loving you." The words hung in the air between them, not quite a formal declaration but close enough to make Catherine's heart race. They had danced around the word love all summer, but neither had said it directly until now. "I love you too," she said softly, and felt something settle into place inside her chest. They stood there for a moment in the middle of the campus path, surrounded by the familiar sounds of returning students and the beginning of a new semester. Catherine thought about all the ways this moment might have gone differently if the summer had unfolded as originally planned. Would they have grown this close? Would they have learned to depend on each other so completely? Would they be standing here now, blonde hair catching the lamplight, feeling like they could face anything together? She would never know, and, suddenly, she was grateful for that uncertainty. The path they had taken had been difficult, but it had led them to this moment, to this certainty, to this feeling of being exactly where they needed to be. As they resumed walking, Catherine felt the last of her nervousness about returning to school fade away. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, certainly. There would be academic work to catch up on, social dynamics to navigate, and practical decisions to make about their future. But tonight, walking across the campus with William beside her and her new blonde hair glowing in the lamplight, Catherine felt ready for whatever came next. The summer had changed her in ways she was still discovering, but perhaps the most important change was the simplest. She had learned to trust that she was strong enough to handle whatever life brought her way. And, with William beside her, she felt like that strength had doubled. The weeks following Catherine's return to campus settled into a rhythm that felt both familiar and entirely new. Her blonde hair had become something of a campus sensation, with strangers stopping her to compliment the dramatic change and friends constantly remarking on how different she looked. But, for Catherine, the external transformation was just a reflection of the deeper changes that had taken place over the summer. Her relationship with William had shifted into something more solid and intentional than before. They had moved past the casual dating phase into something that felt more like a partnership. They studied together in the library, their books spread across the same table, occasionally reaching out to touch hands or share a knowing look. They ate meals together in the dining hall, no longer needing to negotiate who would sit where or whether they were hanging out or on a date. The distinction had become meaningless. What surprised Catherine most was how naturally they had begun planning for a future together. Conversations about graduate school applications now included discussions about which programs they could both attend. Career planning sessions involved considering how their goals might complement each other rather than compete. It wasn't that they had lost their individual ambitions, but rather that those ambitions had evolved to include space for each other. The change was most evident in Catherine's academic focus. Before her father's heart attack, she had been drifting somewhat, unsure what to do with her psychology degree after graduation. The summer had crystallized her interest in family therapy and crisis counseling. She had experienced firsthand how medical emergencies could devastate not just patients but entire families, and she wanted to help others navigate those turbulent waters. William had been incredibly supportive of this new direction, even helping her research graduate programs that specialized in family systems therapy. His own major in social work seemed to complement her interests perfectly, and they had begun talking seriously about potentially working together professionally someday. But the transition back to academic life wasn't without its challenges. Catherine found herself struggling to care about some of the assignments that had seemed so important before the summer. A paper on theoretical frameworks felt abstract and irrelevant when compared to the very real crisis her family had faced. Group projects with classmates who complained about minor inconveniences made her want to shake them and explain what real problems looked like. It was during one particularly frustrating study group session that Catherine first realized how much she had changed. The group was discussing a case study about family dysfunction, and her classmates were offering theoretical interpretations that struck her as completely disconnected from reality. "But don't you think the family dynamic might be more complex than that?" Catherine found herself saying, interrupting a particularly academic analysis. "I mean, when families are dealing with real crisis, the textbook models don't always apply cleanly." The group stared at her with varying degrees of surprise and interest. Catherine realized she had spoken with an authority that came from experience rather than just academic study. "Have you dealt with family crisis before?" asked Jessica, one of her study group partners. Catherine hesitated, then decided to share a carefully edited version of her summer experience. "My father had some health issues over the summer," she said simply. "It made me realize how much I didn't understand about how families really function under stress." The conversation that followed was different from their usual theoretical discussions. Catherine found herself drawing connections between the academic material and real-world applications in ways that seemed to energize the entire group. For the first time since returning to school, she felt like her education was serving a purpose beyond just completing requirements. That evening, she called home to check on her father. These nightly conversations had become a ritual during her first weeks back at school, a way to stay connected to the family crisis that had shaped her summer even as she tried to rebuild her academic life. "How are you feeling today, Dad?" she asked, settling into the chair by her dorm room window. "Better every day, sweetheart," her father replied, and Catherine could hear the truth in his voice. The weakness and uncertainty that had characterized his speech immediately after the heart attack were largely gone now. "Dr. Martinez says my numbers are looking good. I might even be cleared for full-time work by the end of the month." Catherine felt a familiar mixture of relief and lingering worry. Her father's recovery had been remarkable, but she couldn't shake the fear that another crisis might be lurking around the corner. The summer had taught her how quickly everything could change. "And how's Mom handling everything?" Catherine asked. "She's doing well. Still worries too much, but that's your mother." Her father paused. "She's been asking about you and William. Says you sound different when you talk about him now." Catherine smiled, thinking about her mother's uncanny ability to read between the lines. "Different how?" "More serious, I think. Like you're making real plans together." Catherine considered this. Was she being that obvious? "Maybe we are," she said finally. "Good for you, sweetheart. That young man proved himself this summer. Anyone can say they care about you, but William showed up when it mattered." After hanging up, Catherine sat in the growing darkness of her dorm room, thinking about her father's words. William had indeed shown up when it mattered, but more than that, he had shown up consistently, day after day, without fanfare or expectation of recognition. He had simply integrated himself into her family's crisis as if it were his own. A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, already knowing it would be William. They had developed an intuitive sense of when the other needed company. "How's your dad?" William asked, settling into the chair across from her desk. "Good. Really good, actually." Catherine studied William's face in the lamplight, still sometimes surprised by how familiar and dear his features had become. "He asked about us." "What did you tell him?" "The truth. That I think we're making real plans together." William nodded slowly. "Are you okay with that?" "Making real plans, I mean. Sometimes I worry that the summer pushed us together faster than we might have chosen under normal circumstances." Catherine had wondered about this herself. Would they have grown this close if not for the crisis? But, when she tried to imagine having faced her father's heart attack alone, or even with the casual support of a newer boyfriend, she felt genuinely grateful for how events had unfolded. I think the summer showed us something that was already there, she said finally. Maybe we would have gotten here eventually anyway, just more slowly. And, you're happy about the faster timeline? Catherine reached for his hand. I'm happy about you. The timeline is just details. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, hands linked, watching the campus come alive with evening activities through Catherine's window. Students walked past in groups, their voices carrying fragments of conversations about homework and weekend plans and relationship drama. Catherine felt oddly removed from that world now, as if she were watching her former self from a distance. Can I tell you something? William said suddenly. Always. I've been thinking about what I want to do after graduation, and I keep coming back to the same thing. I want to work with families dealing with medical crises. Like what your family went through. Catherine looked at him with surprise. Really? This summer, watching your family navigate everything, seeing how the medical team handled not just your dad but your whole family's needs. I realized there's a real gap there. Social workers who specialize in acute medical family support. I think I might want to focus my graduate studies in that direction. Catherine felt something warm unfold in her chest. Not because their career interests were aligning, though that was wonderful, but because she could see how genuinely the experience had affected him. He wasn't just choosing a career path, he was responding to a calling born from real experience. I think you'd be incredible at that, she said softly. Would you mind? Having similar professional interests? I don't want you to feel like I'm copying your path. Catherine considered this. A few months ago, she might have felt territorial about her newfound career clarity. But, now the idea of potentially working in related fields felt exciting rather than threatening. They had learned to function as a team under the most stressful circumstances imaginable. Working together professionally might be a natural extension of that partnership. I think there's room for both of us, she said. And, honestly, after this summer, I can't imagine wanting to tackle big challenges without you. William's face broke into one of his rare, completely open smiles. I love you, he said, and this time the words felt easy and natural rather than momentous. I love you too, Catherine replied, and felt the truth of it settle deeper into her bones. The next few weeks brought a series of small confirmations that their relationship had indeed shifted onto more permanent ground. William began leaving clothes in Catherine's dorm room without either of them discussing it formally. They started receiving social invitations as a couple rather than as individuals who happened to be dating. Their friends began making assumptions about their weekend plans that included both of them automatically. More importantly, they began making decisions together in ways that felt natural rather than forced. When Catherine's advisor suggested she consider applying for a competitive internship at a family therapy clinic, her first instinct was to discuss it with William before responding. When William received information about graduate programs that interested him, he automatically checked their proximity to the schools Catherine was considering. The blonde hair that had initially been such a dramatic change began to feel like simply part of who Catherine was now. She stopped thinking about it as her new look and started thinking of it as just her hair. The transformation had served its purpose, marking the transition from who she had been before the summer to who she was becoming afterward. But, perhaps the most significant change was in how Catherine approached her remaining time at college. Instead of drifting through her final year focused primarily on social activities and immediate gratification, she found herself thinking strategically about how to prepare for the career she now wanted and the life she was building with William. She sought out additional volunteer opportunities at the campus counseling center. She enrolled in an extra course on family systems theory. She began building relationships with professors who could mentor her transition into graduate school. Every choice felt purposeful in a way her earlier college decisions hadn't. William was making similar strategic choices, and they began to function almost like study partners for life planning rather than just academics. They researched graduate programs together, practiced interview skills with each other, and shared books and articles related to their evolving professional interests. Their friends noticed the change, sometimes with admiration and sometimes with bewilderment. Maria commented that Catherine seemed so serious now, as if this were not entirely a good thing. Other friends made jokes about them being an old married couple even though they were still just 21 years old. Catherine found that these comments didn't bother her the way they might have before. She was serious now, about her relationship and her future and her family responsibilities. The summer had taught her that some things were worth taking seriously, and she had no interest in apologizing for that growth. One evening in late October, as they sat in the library working on separate assignments but sharing the same table as had become their custom, William looked up from his textbook suddenly. "I've been thinking," he said quietly. "About what?" "About next year. After graduation." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I know we've talked about graduate school and career plans, but I was wondering, how do you feel about making it official?" Catherine looked up from her own reading, not entirely sure what he meant. "Official how?" William's cheeks flushed slightly. "I don't mean getting married right away," he said quickly. "I just mean acknowledging that we're planning a life together. Maybe getting an apartment together for after graduation, instead of separate places. Making decisions based on the assumption that we're a team." Catherine felt her heart rate increase. It wasn't a marriage proposal, but it felt like something almost as significant. A commitment to intentionally building a shared future rather than just hoping their individual paths would continue to align. "Yes," she said, without hesitation. "I would like that very much." William's smile was radiant. "Really? Really? I can't imagine planning a future that doesn't include you anymore." As they packed up their books and prepared to leave the library, Catherine caught their reflection in the dark windows. Two people who looked older than their years, marked by experiences that had accelerated their emotional development beyond the typical college timeline. Her blonde hair caught the fluorescent lights, a visible reminder of the transformation they had both undergone. Walking back to the dorms together, Catherine felt a deep sense of contentment. The summer had been difficult, but it had led to this moment, this certainty, this feeling of being exactly where she belonged. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and decisions, but tonight she was simply happy to be walking across campus with the person she loved, planning a future that felt both ambitious and attainable. The girl who had rushed across the same campus 7 months ago to meet her casual boyfriend at the library was gone, replaced by a woman who knew what she wanted and who she wanted it with. The blonde hair was just the most visible sign of that transformation. Winter arrived on campus with unusual severity that year, blanketing the familiar paths in snow that crunched under Catherine's boots as she hurried between buildings. The cold seemed to intensify everything, the warmth of indoor spaces felt more precious, the brightness of her blonde hair seemed more striking against the gray landscape, and her relationship with William felt more essential than ever as they moved through the challenging months together. The apartment hunting had begun in earnest after Thanksgiving break. Catherine and William had spent their holiday weekend driving to the mid-sized city where they both planned to attend graduate school, looking at potential places to live together. The experience had been both exciting and sobering, forcing them to have practical conversations about finances, household responsibilities, and personal space that felt very adult. "What about this one?" William had asked, pulling up a listing on his laptop as they sat in a coffee shop between apartment viewings. Catherine leaned over to look at the screen, automatically noting the proximity to both their future schools and the affordability of the rent when split between two people. "It looks promising, but did you see the part about no pets? I was hoping we might get a cat eventually." The casualness with which she said "we still" sometimes surprised her. When had it become so natural to think in terms of joint decisions and shared futures? But the surprise was a pleasant one, like discovering a new room in a house she thought she knew completely. They had settled on a small but bright 2-bedroom apartment with large windows and hardwood floors that reminded Catherine of the family home she had grown to appreciate so much over the summer. The second bedroom would serve as a shared study space, acknowledging that they were both embarking on demanding graduate programs that would require significant amounts of focused work. "Are you nervous about living together?" Catherine's roommate Sarah had asked when Catherine shared the news. Catherine considered the question seriously. In many ways, they had already been living together during the summer crisis at her family home. They had navigated the intimacy of shared daily routines, the challenge of being together during high stress, and the delicate balance of maintaining individual identities while functioning as a team. If anything, having their own space designed specifically for their needs felt like it might be easier than what they had already survived. "Not nervous exactly," Catherine had replied. "More like, excited to see who we are when we're just living our normal life together, without crisis or family or college structure around us." The truth was that Catherine felt more confident about her future than she ever had before. The graduate program acceptances had started arriving in February, and both she and William had gotten into their top choices. More importantly, they were both thriving academically in ways that felt sustainable and personally meaningful. Catherine's senior thesis project had evolved into a comprehensive study of family resilience during medical crises, combining academic research with insights from her own experience. Her advisor had been impressed enough to encourage her to present the research at an undergraduate conference, and there was talk of potentially publishing a version of her findings in a professional journal. The experience of conducting research that felt personally relevant had been transformative for Catherine. Instead of struggling to care about abstract theoretical concepts, she found herself energized by work that connected directly to her evolving sense of purpose. She stayed late in the library not because she had to, but because she was genuinely curious about what she might discover next. William was having a similar experience with his own senior project, which focused on the role of social support systems in medical recovery outcomes. They had become informal research partners, sharing articles they found interesting and discussing methodological approaches over dinner. Their professors had begun to notice the quality of insight they brought to class discussions, born from real experience rather than just academic study. "You two have developed quite a sophisticated understanding of family systems theory," Dr. Patterson had commented after a particularly engaging class discussion. "Have you considered co-authoring something together for publication?" The suggestion had planted a seed that Catherine found herself thinking about frequently. The idea of building a professional partnership alongside their personal relationship felt natural rather than overwhelming. They had learned to collaborate effectively under the most challenging circumstances. Doing so in an academic or professional context seemed like a logical extension of their existing dynamic. But it was during spring break that Catherine experienced the most significant test of how much she had changed over the past year. She and William had planned to spend the week with her family, partly to celebrate her father's full return to health and partly to introduce William more formally to her extended family during a planned reunion. The reunion brought together aunts, uncles, and cousins who hadn't seen Catherine since before her father's heart attack. The last time most of them had been together, Catherine had been a somewhat directionless college student with brown hair and a casual attitude toward her future. Now she arrived with blonde hair, a clear sense of professional purpose, and a relationship that was obviously serious and committed. "Catherine, honey, you look so different," her Aunt Linda exclaimed during the first evening's gathering. "That hair is gorgeous, but there's something else too. You seem so grown up." Catherine smiled, thinking about how accurate that assessment was. "It's been a big year," she said simply. What struck her most about the family gathering was how naturally William fitted into the group. Her cousins sought him out for conversations about sports and career plans. Her aunts included him in kitchen conversations about family recipes and holiday traditions. Her uncles asked his opinion about everything from political issues to home repair projects. Most importantly, Catherine watched how William interacted with her father. The relationship that had been forged during the crisis over the summer had evolved into something that looked remarkably like genuine friendship. They spent long periods talking about the family business, William asking thoughtful questions and offering insights based on his social work training that her father found genuinely helpful. "That young man is good for you," her grandmother pulled Catherine aside to say during the second day of the reunion. "But, more than that, he's good for our whole family. Your father talks about him like another son." Catherine felt tears prick her eyes unexpectedly. She had known that William had made a positive impression during the summer, but seeing him integrated so completely into her extended family felt like confirmation that they were building something that would last. The most emotional moment came when her father asked William to help him with a toast during the final evening's dinner. "This year has been difficult for our family," her father began, his voice still carrying traces of the vulnerability that had marked his early recovery period. "But it's also been illuminating. We've learned who we can count on, what really matters, and how strong we are when we stand together." He paused, looking around the table at the gathered family members. "Catherine brought William into our lives during our darkest hour, and he didn't just support her, he supported all of us. I want to publicly thank him for that, and to let everyone know that as far as I'm concerned, he's family now." William's face flushed with emotion, and Catherine felt overwhelmed by the significance of her father's words. In her family, the designation of family was not given lightly. It meant acceptance, inclusion, and permanent belonging in a way that went far beyond temporary relationships. After the reunion ended and they drove back to campus, Catherine and William were both unusually quiet, processing the intensity of what they had experienced. "Your family is amazing," William said finally. "I feel so lucky to be included." "My dad meant what he said," Catherine replied. "About you being family. That's not something he would say if he didn't mean it completely." "How does that make you feel?" William asked. Catherine considered the question. A year ago, her father's public declaration might have felt like pressure or premature commitment. Now it felt like recognition of something that was already true. "It makes me feel like we're exactly where we're supposed to be," she said. The final months of senior year passed in a blur of thesis defenses, job applications, graduation planning, and the bittersweet process of saying goodbye to the college environment that had shaped them both. Catherine found herself nostalgic for aspects of campus life she would miss, but also eager to move forward into the next phase of their journey together. The graduation ceremony itself felt anticlimactic compared to all the emotional milestones they had already crossed. Catherine walked across the stage to receive her diploma wearing her cap tilted to show off the blonde hair that had become such a signature part of her identity, with William cheering from the audience alongside both their families. What felt more significant was the celebration dinner afterward, where both sets of parents seemed to naturally assume that Catherine and William's future plans were permanently intertwined. The conversation focused not on what each of them might do after graduation, but on what they were planning together. "So when do you two start looking for wedding venues?" William's mother asked casually over dessert. Catherine felt her cheeks flush, but William reached for her hand under the table in a gesture that felt supportive rather than awkward. "We're focused on graduate school for now," he said diplomatically. "But we're definitely thinking long-term." Catherine appreciated how he had answered the question without shutting down the conversation entirely. They had talked privately about marriage, acknowledging that they both saw it in their future without feeling pressured to set specific timelines. The summer crisis had taught them that life had a way of setting its own schedule, and they had learned to be flexible while remaining committed to their core intentions. Later that evening, as they walked across the campus one last time as students, Catherine reflected on how much had changed since her dramatic return with blonde hair 9 months earlier. The external transformation had indeed reflected deeper shifts in her identity, her priorities, and her understanding of what she wanted her life to look like. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if your dad hadn't gotten sick?" William asked, as if reading her thoughts. Catherine considered this. "Sometimes. But I think we would have found our way to each other eventually. Maybe just more slowly and with less certainty about what we were building." "Do you regret any of it? The crisis, having to take time off school, all the stress?" Catherine looked at him, this man who had proven himself in ways she couldn't have imagined needing when they first started dating. "I regret that my dad had to suffer, and that my family had to worry about money. But everything else, everything that brought us closer together and helped me figure out who I wanted to be. I can't regret any of that." They stood in the middle of the campus quad, surrounded by the buildings where they had studied and grown and fallen in love. Tomorrow they would start packing for their move to their first shared apartment and the beginning of graduate school. The blonde hair that had marked such a dramatic transformation would soon be just one part of a continuing evolution as they built their professional identities and their life together. But tonight, Catherine felt perfectly content to stand in this space between their past and future, grateful for all the unexpected turns that had led them to this moment of certainty about each other and excitement about whatever challenges awaited them next. 2 years later, Catherine stood in the bathroom of their small apartment, staring at her reflection as she prepared for what might be the most important day of her professional life. Her blonde hair, now expertly styled in a professional cut that maintained its striking color while looking appropriately serious, framed a face that had continued to mature since those dramatic college days. Today she would defend her master's thesis, a comprehensive study of family resilience during medical crises that had evolved far beyond her original senior project. The research had taken her into hospital family waiting rooms, support group meetings, and crisis intervention sessions that felt both academically rigorous and deeply personal. William knocked softly on the bathroom door. "How are you feeling?" he called through the wood. "Nervous," Catherine replied honestly. "But good nervous." "Ready nervous." She opened the door to find William dressed in his own professional attire, looking every bit the accomplished graduate student he had become. His master's program in medical social work had been as demanding as her clinical psychology coursework, but they had supported each other through the late-night study sessions, comprehensive exams, and practicum placements that had shaped the past 2 years. "You're going to be brilliant," William said, straightening the collar of her blazer in a gesture that had become automatic between them. "Your committee already knows the quality of your work. Today is just about presenting what you've already accomplished." Catherine nodded, feeling the truth of his words settle her nerves slightly. The thesis defense was important, but it was also a formality at this point. Her research had been well received, her advisor had expressed confidence in her readiness, and she had been accepted into a doctoral program that would allow her to continue this work at an even deeper level. More significantly, she had already begun her clinical work with families facing medical crises, serving her practicum hours at the same hospital where her father had recovered 3 years earlier. The full-circle nature of that placement still moved her sometimes, particularly when she worked with families who were experiencing the same fear and financial stress her own family had faced. "Dr. Patterson called yesterday," William mentioned as they gathered their materials for the day. "She wanted to wish you luck, but also to tell you that the journal editor is very interested in publishing your research. They want to fast-track the review process." Catherine felt a flutter of excitement alongside her nerves. The possibility of having her master's research published in a peer-reviewed journal felt like validation that she had chosen the right path, that the crisis that had redirected her life had led to work that might help other families navigate similar challenges. The drive to campus took them past familiar landmarks that now carried different meanings than they had during their undergraduate years. The coffee shop where they had planned their apartment hunt was now where they met with study groups and research collaborators. The campus quad where they had walked as uncertain college seniors was now where they occasionally returned for alumni events as confident graduate students. "Can I tell you something?" Catherine said as William parked near the psychology building. "Always. I keep thinking about that day I came back to campus with blonde hair. How nervous I was about everything changing, about whether we would still fit together, about whether I could handle returning to school after everything that had happened with my dad." William smiled. "You were terrified. But you were also determined. I remember thinking you looked like someone who had survived something important and come out stronger. I feel like that person today. Nervous about the next step, but confident that I can handle whatever comes. And certain that we can handle it together." The thesis defense itself went better than Catherine had dared to hope. Her committee asked challenging questions that demonstrated they had engaged seriously with her research, but nothing felt hostile or designed to trip her up. She found herself drawing not just on academic knowledge but on the real-world experience that had initially motivated her interest in this field. When Dr. Martinez, her thesis advisor, asked her to step out of the room while the committee deliberated, Catherine felt oddly calm. She had done the work, presented it clearly, and answered the questions to the best of her ability. The outcome was no longer entirely in her control. William was waiting in the hallway when she emerged, along with her parents who had driven up for the defense. Her father looked healthy and robust, fully recovered from his heart attack and clearly proud of how his medical crisis had ultimately contributed to his daughter's professional calling. "How did it go?" her mother asked anxiously. "I think it went well," Catherine said honestly. "But we'll know for sure in a few minutes." The wait felt longer than it probably was, but eventually Dr. Martinez opened the door with a broad smile. "Congratulations, Catherine. Your committee has unanimously approved your thesis." You've officially earned your master's degree. The celebration that followed felt both joyous and surreal. Catherine had worked toward this moment for 2 years, but having it actually arrive felt almost anticlimactic. The real satisfaction had come from the work itself, from the families she had helped during her practicum, from the research insights that might benefit other clinicians working with similar populations. Later that evening, back in their apartment with takeout containers scattered across their small dining table, Catherine and William finally had a chance to process the significance of the day. "So what now?" William asked. "You start your doctoral program in the fall, I finish my master's next spring, and then we figure out our next adventure together?" Catherine nodded. They had already been accepted into programs that would allow them to stay in the same city, and William had been offered a graduate assistantship that would lead directly into a job at the same hospital where Catherine was completing her clinical training. The pieces were falling into place in ways that felt both planned and serendipitous. "I've been thinking about something," Catherine said. "About how we met, and how everything unfolded, and what we've built together." "What about it?" "I think we've been approaching this backward. We've been talking about getting married someday, after we finish school and establish our careers and feel like we have everything figured out. But we've already been through the hardest test possible. We've already proven we can handle crisis together, support each other's dreams, build something meaningful while facing uncertainty." William set down his chopsticks and looked at her with complete attention. "What are you saying?" Catherine felt her heart race, but also felt completely certain about what she wanted to say. "I'm saying maybe we don't need to wait for the perfect time. Maybe the perfect time is now, when we know exactly who we are together and what we want to build." William was quiet for a long moment, and Catherine wondered if she had misread their relationship or pushed too hard too fast. But then, his face broke into the kind of smile she had learned to recognize as his response to something that made him deeply happy. "Are you proposing to me?" he asked. Catherine laughed, feeling suddenly giddy with the boldness of what she was suggesting. "I think I might be. Or at least proposing that we stop waiting and start planning." William stood up from his chair and moved around the table to kneel beside her seat. From his pocket, he pulled out a small velvet box that made Catherine's breath catch in her throat. "I've been carrying this around for 3 weeks," he said, opening the box to reveal a simple but beautiful ring. "Waiting for the right moment, the perfect romantic setting, the ideal timing." "But you're right. We don't need perfect timing. We just need each other." Catherine stared at the ring, then at William's face, then back at the ring. "You were planning to propose?" "I was planning to propose when you felt ready to be proposed to. I didn't expect you to propose first." "I didn't expect me to propose first either," Catherine admitted. "But today, defending my thesis and thinking about our future and celebrating with our families, it just felt like the right time to stop waiting and start doing." William slipped the ring onto her finger, and Catherine was struck by how natural it felt. After everything they had been through together, everything they had built and survived and accomplished, the physical symbol of their commitment felt like a formality rather than a dramatic change. "So is that a yes?" William asked. "That's definitely a yes," Catherine replied, and leaned down to kiss him. They spent the rest of the evening calling their families with the news, accepting congratulations and excited questions about wedding plans and future arrangements. Catherine found herself laughing at how unsurprised everyone seemed by the announcement. Apparently their commitment to each other had been obvious to their families long before they had made it official. The next morning, Catherine woke up early and found herself standing in front of the bathroom mirror again, looking at her reflection with the kind of assessment she hadn't done in months. The blonde hair that had once represented such a dramatic transformation now just looked like her hair. The face that looked back at her was confident and mature, marked by accomplishments and challenges overcome. But the engagement ring on her finger felt like a new beginning rather than just an acknowledgement of existing reality. It represented a conscious choice to build a future together, to face whatever challenges came next as a committed team, to create something together that was larger than either of them could accomplish alone. William appeared in the doorway behind her, still rumpled from sleep but smiling at her reflection in the mirror. "Any regrets in the clear light of morning?" he asked. Catherine considered the question seriously. Did she regret proposing impulsively? Did she regret accepting his proposal? Did she regret committing to marriage while they were still students, still figuring out their professional identities, still young by most standards? None, she said finally. You? None, William replied. Except maybe that we didn't do this sooner. Catherine turned away from the mirror to face him directly. We did it when we were ready. When we knew for certain what we were choosing and why. Later that morning, as they walked across the campus where their relationship had been tested and strengthened, Catherine reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. The dramatic return with blonde hair 3 years earlier had marked the beginning of a transformation that was still continuing. The crisis that had threatened to derail her education had instead redirected it toward more meaningful work. The relationship that had started as casual college dating had evolved into the foundation for a shared life and career. The blonde hair still caught sunlight as they walked, still drew occasional compliments from strangers, still reminded Catherine of the bold choice she had made to change everything during the hardest summer of her life. But, now it was just one part of a larger transformation that included professional accomplishments, family healing, and a love that had been tested and proven resilient. As they reached the psychology building where Catherine would soon begin her doctoral studies, William caught her hand and squeezed it gently. Ready for the next adventure? He asked. Catherine squeezed back, thinking about all the adventures they had already survived and accomplished together, and all the ones still waiting for them in the future. Ready, she said, and meant it completely. The girl who had rushed across this campus 4 years earlier to meet her casual boyfriend at the library was gone, replaced by a woman who knew exactly what she wanted and who she wanted it with. The blonde hair had been just the beginning of that transformation, a visible marker of the courage to change everything when change was what was needed most. Now, engaged to her best friend and professional partner, embarking on advanced studies in work that felt like a calling rather than just a career choice, Catherine felt ready for whatever came next. She had learned to handle crisis, to build something meaningful from chaos, and to trust that she and William together were stronger than either of them alone. The future stretched ahead of them, full of possibility and promise, and Catherine couldn't wait to discover what they would build together next.